We are here with the winners of the International Booker Prize, Jenny and Michael. So yes. For their wonderful book, Kairos. And if I read right, you have both made history of sorts in winning this award. I think Jenny, the first German writer to be given this award, if I'm not wrong, and Michael, the first man to be given first male translator. So yes. A wonderful, wonderful chance to be here in conversation with these two wonderful writers. So the book we are here to discuss today, Kairos, is very interesting from the outset because it's set in East Berlin, in Germany, in East Germany under the GDR, just before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And ostensibly, it is a love story, which is, of course, it is a love story of sorts. But we know from the outset that something is not quite right in this love story. There is a sense of disquiet to the whole thing, not least because Jenny opens this book with the most startling line that I have read for a long time in a novel, which is that one of the protagonists, the male of the couple, is writing to his ex-lover and he says, "Will you come to my funeral?" So an unusual way to start a love story. He goes on to ask this 3 times in all, and it makes the woman very annoyed and uncomfortable. And he does go on to die, in fact, on the day of the woman's birthday. So we are given an indication straight away that this is going to be an unusual kind of love story. There are disquieting and uncomfortable elements to it. And it, of course, does turn out to be just like that because the woman receives a number of boxes containing this man's old documents, letters, manuscripts, and as she opens them, their past implodes upon her and onto the reader because we are taken straight into the beginning of their relationship. A relationship which is extremely passionate and tumultuous, but becomes increasingly controlling and uncomfortable. And this begins just before, I think it begins around 1986, a few years before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And as events progress, as historical events progress and begin to impinge upon the relationship itself seems to reflect this changing reality. It becomes ever more controlling. So Jenny, my first question is to you. You have written a number of books, many of which are concerned with the cultural and historical reality of Germany. But this is the first time, and you yourself grew up in East Berlin, and you yourself witnessed the events around the fall of the Berlin Wall. But it has taken you more than 30 years to actually address these issues in a book such as in Kairos. Is there a reason why it took you so long, or were there other issues that you wanted to tend to first?
I think it was too, in a way, it was too close to me, and of course, I spoke here and there about this time, and I thought a lot about it, and also how I deal with it emotionally, but I thought for writing a novel about it, you need more distance, and you, in a way, it should become a strange subject to yourself before writing about it. So like as if it were some other subject. So like I really did some research about the time that I lived through for the first time in a like objective way. So what happened when and how this transition from when like the wall fell, the Berlin Wall, and how the transition took place in our country. At this time when I was young myself, I wouldn't reflect on it very much because I was so busy like taking part in everything and facing the many new things and many new rules, and like I was busy, making a living at this time. You know, everything was new. It came also not only like a surprise, but also as a shock in a way to us to get adjusted to the new system. So I was very busy just living. And now, for the first time, I really dealt with it in a more reflected way.
And am I right in thinking, Mikhail, that you grew up in East Berlin as well? No.
Still can't.
I took yours.
No, I mean my own. I'm only the translator of this wonderful book.
Hold it closer.
But I happen to be German. I'm the son of two East German, two emigres from East Germany who left in the 50s. I have relations in Saxony, and I left. In fact, I left West Germany for England when I was 4. I was in Berlin during the 80s. I translated a Brecht play, and I went to Brecht's house on the Chausseestraße, near the backing onto the Dorotheenfriedhof. So I would say I have some sort of inward. I mean, through blood and through reading, and also through some time spent. I have a little familiarity with East Berlin, with East German.
I read something, I don't know if that's correct, which seemed like a very provocative way of talking about your translation work. You are also a poet and a literary critic of some terrifying reputation. And you said about German that once you stopped wanting to not be German, you felt that you had no choice really but to become a translator of German into French, which seems like a karmic inevitability, almost a Hindu way of seeing things.
I mean, I was part of a German family in England in the 1960s, and if you know about the UK in the 60s and 70s, it was still a sort of post-war culture, civilization. The films that came out were kind of war films, and they were all about Hans and Donner and Blitzen and so on, and it was really penitential being a German kid in post-war England. And I sort of grew up bilingual because we spoke German. My parents saw to it that we spoke German in the house, and I spoke English at school, and so bilingual, which is a situation probably vastly familiar to many people in this hall. And if you're bilingual and you don't translate, you're used to being understood, and it's I mean, certainly in the sort of limited context in which I'm speaking. But I really then had to, because it's flat. I mean, German and English are one level, and there's a line between them. And what you have to do is you have to create an angle, and you have to lever it so that all the language comes running down the hill. So all the German pours downhill and turns into English. And you have to really destabilize your world in order to get into that situation. And it is a loss, because I sort of dawned on me a few weeks ago that I don't read anything anymore. I don't write anything anymore. All I do is translate. Everything goes from German into English. And you make yourself into a sort of machine, maybe.
To come back to the book and to the relationship, which we haven't really talked about, Jenny. So we have a relationship which is really astonishing in the sense that it involves a young 19-year-old girl who is brilliant and intelligent and curious, but far younger than her lover, who is some 34 years older to her. So there's this imbalance of sorts that's set up right at the beginning. He is this man who leads a life of privilege and comfort. He is extremely culturally educated. And he starts telling Katerina, the woman, all about music and culture and opera. And we have a sense of her being groomed almost, of being told how to view the world, how to appreciate the world through all these meters. And as the book progresses and as the historic moments sort of impinge onto this relationship, it becomes more brutal, the relationship itself more controlling and violent even, abusive. So Jenny, I think you have said somewhere, and yet as it progresses, even though it descends into this sort of violent relationship, there's still almost a nostalgia for the way things were, the way things used to be, especially on the man's part, Hans's part. He seems to still want for things to be the way they used to be. And I think you have written somewhere about East Germans that we never used to see beggars on the street. We don't have prostitution, we don't have sex shops. It is all completely new to us. This is a pretty startling point of view, especially from the Western point of view, who seem to demonize everything about East Berlin, East Germany, the GDR, the communist state. How did you bring this into the book, and how did you have a vision for these characters vis-a-vis this situation?
In a way, the division of Germany gave the structure to the book. So it's you have the two parts mirroring each other, so to say, good part of the love story and the bad part of the love story. But you have also the wall in between, also like dividing Berlin, literally. And you have Katharina, who is, as it was the use in the last years of East Germany, that some people were allowed to visit relatives in the West for special occasions like birthday or something. So she is given the chance to visit Cologne, and then she is kind of shocked by seeing, also she's also doing some shopping. It's not all bad, you know, but she's also shocked by the poverty that she is facing on the street in the middle of the rich people. And also there is some visit in a porno store, and so this is new to her in a shocking way. I think the interesting thing about the division of Germany is that each half was reacting to the other half. So like the East German half tried to keep up with the consumerism of the Western half, so they would try to have good products, or to at least produce themselves some products similar to the Western products, or even get it from there. And the Western half tried to keep up with the social achievements in the East. So it was, I think, perhaps it was a good thing for both halves, that they were not alone, not on their own. So, what I also tried to get into the story by having this generational gap between the two lovers is the early part of the East German history after the war, and even the fascist past that is like the beginning of both states. So this is Germany at this time could also be read as a reaction to fascism. So like the half of Germany which was mainly like installed by the Americans was the Western half, and the other half was like shaped by the Russian state, the Soviet Union. So you have two different ways of dealing with that past, and there were differences. And you could also see in Hans his fascist upbringing as a child, which also is still there when he changes sides and becomes like a very fervent follower of socialist ideas. so you will never, or I hope so, you will never forget about his fascist upbringing too. So he has many times in him, while Katharina is young and like a blank page, I used to call her.
But am I right in thinking there is almost a sense in Katerina of self-censorship? So in the second half, when the relationship really degrades to an extent where Hans is sending Katerina long voice notes telling her about all the wrong things she has done and how she must mend her ways, many red flags popping up here along the way. And she is supposed to respond to this through a letter, a written letter. And in her own diaries, she starts keeping just blank pages. She doesn't respond to these charges. And it almost feels like perhaps a metaphor for perhaps the way East Berlin was reacting to an increasingly repressive government, and because they were complicit in a way with the propagation of the system. Is that something you wanted to show?
Naja, I thought it's interesting how this kind of so-called guilt of Katharina is turned into an instrument to rule her. So Hans is like by making her one night betrayal that big, he's trying to really prolong the relationship in a way, and he's using guilt. And I think this is one of the starting problems already in the Soviet Union in the 30s during Stalin times. You will have this invented guilt in a way which gave reason to put people into gulags or even shoot them. You know, it was like not a real guilt, but an invented guilt to get power over them and to gain power. And so this is in a way what Hans is doing with his interrogations. You know, he wants to produce Katharina as like a human being made of glass, so that he can see everything. And not funny, but the problem is that if you think you will bring truth into the world by interrogations, you know, the truth is disappearing. And it's like, if there is no freedom to tell the truth, and perhaps to even hide something, the truth will not be there. So this is what interested me, that you will have this structure in private lives as well as in political systems.
And Mikhail, can I come back to you with a question on translation? You know, we are a country with 22 official languages and many other dialects. But our translations are in its infancy. So we know we have a very rich culture in the States in these languages, and which we are slowly now bringing out and translating into English. And I have attended some friends' sessions on translations in India. And my impression, was that it is the job of a translator to sort of invisibilize themselves, to step back and just literally translate what the writer has written and try and get that point of view across. But I have read, I think, in some of your interviews that yours seem to be a lot more personal. I think you have said that these things are also about me, about your translations, and you really get a sense of you as well in your translations. And how do you view that? How do you view the art of translation in terms of vis-a-vis the writing?
Yeah. It's a question that makes me wriggle.
Sorry about that,
all right.
considering
That's
you've
all right.
just landed from Hamburg.
Squirm. Yeah. I mean, it's things are, different books sort of suggest different treatments. They produce different contexts. I think if you're translating an old book by somebody who's died and that's been translated many times before, several times before, you're in a different position to translating a book that came out last year. There's it's a sort of wider field. I mean, I was making a bit of a fuss, I think, just because I think there isn't that much fuss made of translators. Where would I mean? My mind is somewhere in the Arabian Sea. Yeah,
Okay.
help me, help me. I mean, my master is my master. Thank you. My master is Jenny, but my master is also English, and I want to do things with English. I want sometimes I want to do things that excuse me, English is good at. Sometimes I actually want to sort of show English things that don't often don't happen in it, or that it's less good at doing. So I mean, even when countries are neighbours, and even when the languages are related, there's, you know, there are, I mean, there are differences, and it's all detail. It's a matter of detail, which you know, I for my sins I find endlessly fascinating, and I think if you're not in it, you possibly won't even see the difference, or you don't know what's. I really like to. I like to hear a book. I like to. I mean, I was in wonderful hands with Kairos, because it's moving all the time. There's things that are drifting, things that are suggesting, things that are sort of juxtaposed. The whole thing is in continual flux. I mean, as you suggested with these tapes, for instance, and you know, East Germany is a different country depending when you got in it. It's like Heraclitus' river. Oh, beg your pardon. Yeah. So sorry. It's like Heraclitus' river. You know, if you get in one place, it's one thing. If you get in 10, 20 years later, it's something else, and that's understood. But it's Jenny made all this so perfectly clear, and it's. I mean, everything to do with translating is you know, it's a metaphor. Maybe it's like cooking a dish from a wonderful recipe.
Jenny, to come back to you after this, I had wanted to ask Michael as well. You know, stylistically, the book is very dense. You know, there are passages where they are talking to each other, the lovers are talking to each other, and they're run-on sentences almost, which is marvelous, I find. It just pulls you into the world of these lovers. You're unable to break free almost, because there's nothing to interrupt the flow, in a sense, both physically on the page and emotionally. It's pulling you in a swirl of emotion, one to the other, one to the other. But a sense I got reading it and looking at the way the book is constructed with, you know, a box 1 and box 2, it reminded me of the boxes in an opera house, for example. And I was almost reminded of a libretto. The book reminds me of a libretto for a musical piece. And these two lovers seem to be caught in an endless aria which never ends, you know, echoing between the two of them, because there are very few other people involved. So and then I found out that you have been a director of opera. So was this anything that you consciously did, or did it just come up and this kind of came out of the style that you wanted to project?
Yeah, I think you cannot put it so directly, but of course I love music, and I have been listening to music a lot, and so musical structures are always in the like, perhaps not only background but foreground of my mind, and in a way I consider language also a musical way to express yourself and its language is sound as well. And you, even if reading silently, you will listen to the language in a way. You will imagine the music in it. So, especially with this book, it was also like listening to different voices on different levels. Even if you have mainly the two lovers, you will listen to the things that they really express, or like the real dialogue. And then you will also listen to the hidden voices of the two of them, so like what they are thinking about. And then you are listening to another two voices of what they are remembering, also of the other one. So you have a mixed up choir in a way. And perhaps this was what you meant by, like, you cannot get out of this dense structure of different dialogues taking place at the same moment. So as we all know, is like what we speak or what is to be heard is only one thing, but what we think and what we hide and what we remember in the same moment is another thing, and it takes place in the same moment. So this interested me, and and the two boxes, I wouldn't call it an opera because of the two boxes, but perhaps, there are repetitions in the book. It's something like a rondo. So there are main scenes on which the two of the lovers come back again and again in different ways. So the things that they like and love in the beginning, and that the things that are like essential as a basis for the whole relationship are the things that are avoided in the second part of the novel. The ways, the path through the city they take in the beginning is the path that they avoid in the second half because it's too painful. He says it's too painful to go there again. You know, you have this coming back to the same theme, but in a different way. And this is also a kind of a musical structure.
And there were many classical musicians who were quoted throughout the book, and it was very tempting to listen to those pieces as I was reading the book to see, if it enhanced the reading experience, but that would have taken too long. Katharina also asks about the music which was played for Hans's funeral. So clearly this is something that was, important for him, and she double checks on it to see if it was the right order. You were talking about the names of the streets in East Berlin, and you mentioned how they change after the fall of the wall, and how the same person walking those same streets might feel so lost in the world when the names of these streets have changed, are no longer the names they remember. Buildings may have changed. This is something that you would have experienced yourself. How did you live that?
Yeah, it's interesting that every government tries to get hold of the people who are remembered or not remembered. So in Germany we have quite a few of those changes.
Oh, we have quite a few here as well.
Yeah, so there were like Adolf Hitler streets everywhere, and then the name was taken away after the war, of course. And then there were certain communists in the names of the streets still to be found in the eastern half. So if someone is familiar with a famous communist in German history, so he will always know if he's in the western or eastern half, because you can see the Thielmann Street, August Bebel Street, Clara Zetkin Street, you will only find in the eastern half of Germany or of Berlin. And some of the names were changed, and the interesting thing that I mention in my book is like the example was Dimitrov, who was the Bulgarian communist leader. He was, in a way, he was one of the very few good ones if you want to call it like that, in the Soviet Union immigration times in the 30s, but then he turned himself to a politician of the not so good type in Bulgaria when he was back. So he's a complex personality, and the name was taken away from a big street in Berlin, but it was the name that was given back to the street referred to the former German and now Polish parts of Germany, which also didn't make a good impression on the Easterners. So as if the war hadn't taken place, and the Polish parts of former Germany would still belong to the country, which was perhaps not the best choice as well.
Yes, and you also, I think, mentioned how Katharina, after the fall of the wall, the Berlin Wall, and after East Germany is incorporated into Germany, that she has this sense of having to learn everything anew, a new way of life, because the old one has suddenly overnight been made redundant. So it must be very frustrating to feel that you have become a child all over again, having to learn a new way of being, a new way of conducting yourself in the world, new ideals, new, all sorts of things which are now no longer true for you. How did you try to bring that out as well?
Naja, it was very strange that all of a sudden, so from like one moment to the other, the country where you came from was turned into like a museum piece. So in a way I felt old, because I was like my own grandma, like saying, once it was like this, but it's no more like this, It's like, normally if you grow up and there's no break in your biography or no cut, you just live on, and you are a child and then a young person and then a grown-up person, it goes on and on. But with this fall of the wall, everything changed, so that it was like all of a sudden being an old person, remembering things that are not existing anymore, only in the stories and in the interpretations of photographs, which is also a complex thing. How to tell the stories, who's in power when it comes to getting a meaning out of something that happened. And that's an interesting question also for today. How to make, what story to make of a fact.
In fact, the book at a certain level functions like an archive as well, I feel, the way these boxes arrive and she unboxes all these letters, the way they write letters to each other, the way in which she keeps a diary of their relationship, the way he also sends these voice notes. You very much have a sense of an archive being created, and then we, the readers, are able to unpack and slowly, have a look into this world which is now obviously, disappeared.
I must confess that I love archives. And
So do I.
And I think archives, different from what one might think, archives are always places that are very alive, or they keep life inside. But of course, you need to be willing and interested to bring life back to life out of the documents. And I think the fascination for documents also has a lot to do with this profession of writing itself, because writing is a kind of like preserving time or bringing back to life times that are or have already passed, or documents are. Also reading a book is a time travel, and reading documents is also a time travel, and both meet in the language. And I always had I always liked to also put documents into a text. In this book, perhaps it's not so much, but I also thought it's interesting that when you have a box full of documents, different times touch each other because they are just put into the box, and then you have the beginning and the end of a story and the middle of a story, and it's all mixed up. And so this was also a way to tell the story so that the times reflect each other, so they are answering throughout the book.
Yeah,
So-
you get a very strong sense of that actually in the book. Michael, I wanted to ask you a question. I think you said somewhere that German is like an open wound to which the balm of English. Now, I think you're regretting all the things you said in interviews. Yes.
Yes, I suppose, I suppose, I'm sort of like one of these street names. I mean, I was a German street name till I was 4, and then we moved to England, and I became English, and so Michael became Michael. And that's sorry, what's the question? I'm really all over I'm losing it. What's
The German was like an open wound.
Yes, I mean, and it's a chance for me in writing these books for these other people, which I do. Writing these books for these other people, as I do, to take away the difference, or to kind of smooth over the gap or the chasm between English and German, and it allows me to sort of pretend that things that happen in Germany, because they happen in English, happen in England, and it's sort of there isn't the sort of the cut in the biography. But this is very, very self-serving, and it's not about any of that at all, really. And it's really an opportunity to give English people the experience of something that they haven't. I mean, at the end of a because England goes on and on, and there hasn't been this sort of severance. There hasn't been a sort of no more. That was it. Under new management, that hasn't happened to England.
Correct. No, absolutely true. Jenny, one last question to you, I think, before we go over to question and answers. We were talking earlier, you and I, and it's interesting how the world, reacts differently, even to something like the fall of the Berlin Wall. Their notions of communism, for the way in which the West and America viewed that, was very much a victorious moment for democracy, for freedom. Finally, the East Berliners were going to be free, and it was a joyous moment for everybody. Even here, I remember being quite young and seeing these images through the BBC of a very joyful moment. But of course, different parts of the world have different experiences with communism. Even here in India, we have states which have been communist-run, and so we are much more familiar and forgiving of the communist experience. Have you felt a difference when you are traveling around the world with your book in the way in which people have, taken this book to heart or reacted to it in any way?
Yeah, there's still some discussion going on about the advantages of society based on political freedom, and an opposite about a society based on social achievements and justice. I think what we all should keep thinking about is if freedom is necessarily or needs necessarily to be connected with capitalism. So freedom is a very important achievement. Freedom of speech, and not being put into prison for your thoughts, and open discussion. This makes a good society. But if it is necessarily connected to a state which has this deep gap between the poor and the rich people, the best freedom doesn't reach the people. You know, if someone is poor and he or she has to think about how to make a living, they cannot make any use of the freedom of speech. You know, they don't even end up at this question. They are just busy with making a living. And I think the mixture of both advantages would be the thing that we need as mankind. And so that's it. Thank you.
That's wonderful. And I think that's a wonderful way to end this discussion and open up for questions. If there are any questions in the audience, please. That lady has a mic. We'll start with her, then we'll come to you. Go ahead.
Okay, this question is for Jenny. I really love the book, especially I spent the last week reading it and fell in love with Katrina and Hans. My question is, as an author in this particular genre of fiction, like a historical fiction, how do you find a balance between history, the historical narrative, and the fictional story? How do you know which to give importance at what time? Your thoughts on that.
Yeah. As you saw, I start with the private love story, and more the historic events are entering the story and get interwoven with a private story, because the big historic events can take place just around the corner without people taking part in it, as we all know. But slowly, the slow process, or also the quick process, but the process in detail of a transition from one state to the next is, of course, only visible in the private lives of people. So you will see, Hans is losing his job, and people are afraid how they can adjust to the new system, and this you will only see in the private lives. So you have this big historic event of the fall of the wall, which is not in the middle of the attention in my novel. It's just happening around the corner, more or less. So it's out of sight. But what follows after that is in the story, and you will see it. And hopefully, if some reader gets emotionally involved in the story, it gives an impression of how it felt like to be also lost in a way during this transition.
Thank you. And that lady there has been raising her hand. Yeah, I think this lady has been raising her hand for a while.
Can I ask a question?
No, can we just go to the lady? Because she just, from the beginning, she's had her hand up. Sorry, we'll come back to you.
The green lady,
Mike.
the green lady in the fifth row.
No, yeah. Germany's culture of dealing with memory. Yeah.
So why is it that when the two Germanys united, they were in such a hurry to erase?
There's the mic.
Yeah, my question relates to the way Germany, the German culture deals with memory. And they have the unique concept of Mahnmal, that is leaving memory intact, agnostic of whether it is a good memory or a bad memory, to remind people of the historic atrocities. Why is it that, I'm talking about the Holocaust and the memory thereafter. But when the two Germanys united, Germany was in a hurry to erase memories of the East. Like, for instance, Abzweig became Ausfahrt within the first year, like on the highway. The linguistic memory was erased. The names of the streets were erased. Why is it that that was not left as a reminder of the past? Why this contradiction in dealing with memory?
Yeah, that's a good question. I could put it as well. Yeah, I think, what do you think? Also, it was a process to keep the memory of the guild, of the German guild, from the fascist times alive, or to face it. And there was a time right after the war where there was no memory of all this. Only the generation of in 1968 they forced their parents to confess their guilt. So this took some time, and the problem with the fascist times was that everybody was, like almost everybody, or like most of the people were involved in the fascist system, and they were kind of really euphoric about like also the war in the beginning and things like that, and killing Jews and all this. So in the Western society, this took like 20 years to be faced. While when the wall fell, the mistakes made in Eastern Germany and like also the injustice in the socialist system was just on one part of Germany, and it was much easier to for the western half of people who were like running the whole country. Then it was much easier to just expel it from history, or like to only see the bad sides of it. And it was not the process of a united memory. And until now, it's like the Easterners are referring to a completely different kind of history, because they it was like 40 years of split history. So there was a funny thing that just recently I met someone and we talked about the Angela Merkel, and that she didn't have so much humor. And the lady I was speaking to, she was like involved in the government, and she said she couldn't have any humor because her humor was based on East German experience, and there was no one from East Germany surrounding her. So if she was referring to some East German funny thing, nobody would understand her. So, and I thought this was interesting too. This is not only about suffering, but there is no basis that we all have, or that the whole society is based on. And this is the process of like having experiences in common is still going on, and perhaps is only succeeding in the next generation.
No, that's a fascinating insight, Jenny, and a great question. I think we have time maybe for one or two last questions.
Yeah, hi. My question is for Jenny. First of all, thank you for Kairos. Jenny, this book is a work of fiction, and you went back in history to narrate a story set in 1986 in Berlin. Did you face any challenges in making it relevant to today's audience and giving it a universal appeal?
Relevant to the readership now?
Yes.
In a way, perhaps there's one aspect of like when I was traveling in the course of my life as a writer, I often met people who have seen the movie Life of Others. And in some places it was the only thing people knew about East Germany. And I thought perhaps there should be also added some a more complex picture of the living before the fall of the wall, including the fascist past, and also told beyond the fall of the wall and all things that followed. So to make it more complex. But normally I'm very egoistic, and I only think about things that interest me. And I think if a book is interesting to me, it will also be perhaps interesting to others.
Sure. I think a last question
Hello.
from this gentleman
Yeah.
who's ready here.
My question is to Mr. Michael Hoffman. You have translated prominent writers like Kafka, Hans Fallada, Herta Müller, and Jenny Appenbach. Who is your favorite author, and which translation process excited you the most? Then you play both as a creative writer, role of the creative writer, and as well as a translator, and as well as a poet, creative writer actually. Which part excites you the most, and which role you like?
Thank you. I very much I love a German writer called Wolfgang Köppen, whose dates are 1996. I met him 2 years before he died in Munich. He wrote his books in the 50s about the sort of the young West German, the sort of early experiences of West Germany. One in Munich, still under occupation. One in Bonn, when Bonn was the capital, and one in Rome, a book called Death in Rome. I really like those books, and I translated them over 30 years. Some of them I did on spec. I mean, I did without an assignment.
Thank you so much. I
Last
think
question,
that's all
sir.
we
Sir,
have
last
time
question.
for. I think that's all
Sir,
we have
time's
time
up.
for. You can come and maybe speak
Sir,
to
last
the...
question. Last question.
Yeah, we've been standing for.
Last question.
A last question from a student. Okay, maybe quickly.
Who or what really inspired you to write the book called Kairos?
What inspired me?
Yes.
Who or what?
Who or what inspired you?
Life.
I think you can come and speak to the author separately afterwards, and do go and buy the books. They are available here in the bookstore.